Remember when the global economy was booming? The price of everything was doubling. Steel, gas, property. Oil was $147 a barrel. There were over 1,000 billionaires on the planet and going up. World markets were full of bubbles, and one bubble was bigger than all the rest. Contemporary art.
At $77 million. Thank you.
This Chinese painting cost a record £3 million. A shiny hanging heart went for almost 12. An Andy Warhol sold for over £35 million. In those days, Damien Hirst butterfly paintings were priced at up to £4 million each, and collectors bought hundreds of them.
I have to say, I've had the time of my life.
What we're witnessing is a gilded age, much like that at the turn of the last century.
I think that we will see $1 billion artwork in our lifetime.
Even when the world economy began to collapse, the contemporary art market kept on rising. The prices seemed to defy all reason. It was as if it had become a game that only the billionaires knew how to play. Its rules were a mystery. That's why I spent a year investigating the biggest, longest-lasting, bubbliest bubble of them all. And that's why I recently returned to the same art world to see what had happened since boom turned to bust. My name is Ben Lewis, and this is my electric car. I've always liked contemporary art. At home I hang pictures on my walls and exhibition catalogues fill my shelves. But I'd always dreamt of driving a work of art. So I persuaded one of Germany's leading artists to make that wish come true. There's one swelling here.
Yeah, there should be another one in the back.
And here he is. Tobias Rehberger is known for combining design and conceptual art. He's shown in biennales and museums all over the world.
We try to make it look like a big mistake.
You like to work with mistakes, do you not?
Yeah, I do.
As many as possible.
Yeah, they're usually the more interesting parts of something.
Before he came to visit, Tobias had emailed me computer drawings of how he wanted the bodywork of the car altered, with asymmetrical bumps. I found a garage with artistically minded mechanics, and they set to work. I was a bit worried that the swellings might not be big enough for you.
No, I just wanted it to be look a little bit crook, nothing else. You know, not too obvious, and like almost as if it would be a bit out of focus or something. Now we see what else we can do.
This was my idea of good art. It was colourful and witty.
You want more the sportif or the more elegant version?
Oh, sportive.
Sportive.
I'm very sporty.
Okay.
It taught you to see the world in a new way.
All these industrial products we're surrounded by, it's kind of boring and sad in a way, no? I mean, that's why people spray the ghetto blasters or, you know, to make it an object that's individual.
I write about contemporary art for British newspapers. Often, my reviews are enthusiastic. But I didn't like what was happening in the contemporary art market, and I'd written about that too. Much of the art was mass-produced, repetitive and commercial. Collectors bought it for investment and stored vast amounts of it in warehouses. All you ever read about in newspapers was the new record prices. And the special privileges our society gave to art and artists were being exploited by some of the world's richest people to make yet more money. The best artists agreed with me. That's great.
Yeah. And like,
do you ever sort of, look at what's happening? Like, look at, Damien Hirst or Warhols at auction and think, is this good or bad for art?
I think it's more, the danger is more than like how people speculate with art. It's kind of a misuse somehow. It's not made for that.
Tobias had given me this work of art for free, but on one condition, that I didn't sell it. The art world is notoriously secretive, and I knew that it would be difficult to investigate it, but at least now I would blend in. I began following the contemporary art market here. Sotheby's is holding its most successful contemporary art auction ever. We are still 6 months away from financial meltdown, but already the economic news is bad. The American housing market has collapsed and banks have written off billions of pounds worth of bad debts. Here, though, it's as if none of this had ever happened.
6 million 5, 7 million, 7 million 5, 8 million, 8 million 5, 9 million, 9 million 5, 10 million, 10 million 5, 11 million.
500 collectors, gallery owners, dealers and art advisors are seated in this hall. They've come to buy contemporary art. Art that has been made since 1945, now the hottest area of the market. Contemporary art has a broad definition. It includes some of the great names of art of the last 50 years. Artists who are now dead and whose reputations are established, like Rothko and Warhol. And artists who are still alive and producing work, like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons. Alive or dead, prices for all these artists have increased many times over.
It is in the room on the aisle at $21 million then. It's against you, Grégoire.
Yes, that's $21 million for a one-colour painting. Around £11 million with fees. A lot, even when the colour's gold.
Well spotted.
The blue one's a bit cheaper.
15,500,000.
And the pink one's a snip.
Selling then for $4,200,000.
Some buyers raise their hands to bid on the art for sale. Others prefer to offer their millions anonymously over the phone via the auction house sales team. Just a month ago, the IMF announced that losses from the credit crunch would add up to £500 billion. That will prove to be a massive underestimate. But here, they appear to think the good times will never end.
That is exactly the bid I wanted to see, and that's 642. Thank you.
Contemporary art is the lifestyle choice of our generation.
Don't you just love seeing where collectors live?
Contemporary art also fits into the spaces that we now inhabit. These large sort of 21st century lofts in Manhattan demand beautiful, large-scale works.
Hi. Hi. Wow, that's a lot of Murakami.
You can still buy the masterpieces of contemporary art, they're still available. You can't buy the masterpieces of Impressionist and modern art, you can't buy the masterpieces of old masters as readily as you can contemporary art.
Wow. Buongiorno.
So you have this whole series of things which have come together, and then you have a situation where there are some very great artists around.
Questo sì, questo è inglese.
Ah, di Damien.
Damien, Glenn Brown,
Matthew Barney.
It's not just about rich collectors. The public's relationship with contemporary art has been transformed. Once, it was distrustful and dismissive. But attendances at museums and galleries have shot up. More people go to art galleries than football matches in Britain today. I think that's all good news. But at the same time, art has become commercialised as never before. It's now a 21st century commodity.
Has there ever been a moment when you thought, my God, prices have got out of hand? Do you know what I mean? Like
I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm very passionate about the art. So I've always believed that this art, that's been made since the Second World War can stand up with any art from the history of art. And many of the great prizes that have been made recently have been made for masterpieces of the field. And that is something we should never forget.
I agreed with Francis Outred up to a point, but I didn't think his arguments explained the high prices, and I didn't think the most expensive artists were necessarily the best.
Selling them for $77 million. Are we all done? Fair warning. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Ollie. At $77 million.
The incredible rise of contemporary art began 10 years ago. Collectors like Charles Saatchi created the template. In the 90s, Saatchi bought young British artists such as Damien Hirst and Tracey Emin, exhibited them in his gallery or in public museums, and then sold some of the work at a profit. As a new century dawned, scores of newly rich collectors followed his lead. By 2003, a third generation of billionaire hedge funders were active. They paid millions for Warhols, Hirsts, and for Richard Prince's Cowboy series. Marlboro adverts, simply rephotographed and then framed by the artist.
I think people are gravitating to finding the newest and the best and the hippest. You know, some of the galleries that I know usually get phone calls from money or investors who will say, what's the hottest thing? What's the newest thing? That's what everybody's chasing.
Is that the game?
That has become the game, and it's not wrong because you know what? It is a commodity like lots of other things. The only difference is you can live with that commodity. You can use it. You can use it for socialization. It gives you a certain type of a status, a certain type of place.
In the last 2 years, oil sheikhs and Russian billionaires joined the boom, and prices went even crazier. A Georgian oligarch worth £3 billion at the time paid £50 million for this Picasso. The Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, who owns Chelsea Football Club and was worth over £6 billion in 2008, bought this Francis Bacon for £43 million. And then the Qatari royal family, worth zillions of billions, bought a Damien Hirst for almost £10 million and a Rothko for 35.
I think that there are more people internationally that have the capability and the means and the interest to want to collect these iconic trophy objects. And so they will chase each other and they will push the prices further and further because they want these things and they want them now.
In 2008, the world economy began contracting under the impact of the credit crunch. But the art market continued onwards and upwards. There was a new paradigm. People thought that the art market was immune to other economic forces.
People feel safer putting it on their walls. And there's a lot of cash out there. A lot of these guys were very, very smart, and a few years ago they saw this crash or recession or whatever you want to call it coming. They went liquid, and they're sitting on a pot of money, and they don't know what to do with it.
There were people who thought there was more to the rocketing prices of contemporary art than all the new money and all the supposedly exciting artists. I'd come to New York to look at the way business was done in this world. Art market commentators said that strategies used by art dealers also played a role in the inflating values. There was one particular practice which was discussed. Gallery owners, collectors and dealers were said to support or prop up the prices of artists whom they represented or whose work they owned in large quantities.
I was interviewing a fairly major London dealer in his gallery, and he said, "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I said, "Sure." And he went over to the telephone, and he picked up the telephone and started speaking to a member of staff at an auction house. And there was an auction taking place in which one of the artists that he represents was coming up for sale. Anyway, one of these works came up for sale. Then he said, "Bid, bid, 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 bid. That's enough," and put the phone down. And he explained that he routinely bids for work by this artist to ensure that his works never fail to sell at auction.
I decided to talk to some of the billionaire collectors about this practice. This is the apartment of Jose Mugrabi. He is the world's biggest Warhol dealer and owns 800 of them. He and his sons built up Warhol's fame and value in two different ways. Firstly, they lent work to scores of exhibitions around the world. But secondly, allegations had been made that they supported and even pushed up the prices of Warhols at auction. Jose Mugrabi had agreed to meet me to discuss this.
How does one set a price level for an artist like Warhol?
It's very simple. If you have a painting and you think the price is X 100, and there somebody pay 110, the price become 110.
In this article, it says that you decided to leapfrog the price for jackies.
We start to buy jackies at $30,000-$40,000.
Right.
And then we bought Jackie for hundreds, and we bought Jackie for 300, and we bought Jackie for 500, and we bought Jackie for 1 million, and we bought Jackie for 2 million. So, again, this is it. If the market at that moment was 2 million, so we paid 2 million.
People say that also that you protect the prices of Warhols. Does that mean anything?
Look, what you mean protect?
I'll give you
I'm telling you from the beginning that this is my favorite artist. This is my artist. This is something that I love. This is my passion. So is what you mean protect the prices? I protect no one. I protect myself because I love the artist.
You sure? The art market was more confusing than I thought. Jose Mugrabi seemed to agree he was propping up prices, but he said he was only doing that because he loved art so much.
872.
Trying to investigate the art market was very tiring. That night I dreamt I was Jose Mugrabi. I was in his apartment and I was saying, why shouldn't I pay more for Warhols than the next guy if I want them that much? Then Marilyn spoke to me and she said, sometimes a man can have too much of a good thing. Then I woke up. Tomorrow was another day. I had an appointment with Jose's son, Alberto, and another multi-millionaire collector, the New York property magnate, A.B. Rosen. They were in business together. First, they showed me around their offices.
What do we have here?
Couple of portraits.
Couple of portraits. Those are the ones we talked about.
Celebrity series, right?
Celebrity series, or what people wanted to be known as celebrities. Some of them didn't make it. Gavin Turk, a little bit the view and the idea of Warholian, you know, big faces, silver, black and white.
I don't want to be presumptuous, but I wouldn't get too many Gavin Turks if I were you.
I like why? With Che Guevara?
I think it's too close to other artists' work.
That's okay. This is Webster Noble. Actually self-portraits of themselves, basically tattooed on their bodies.
On a very cynical day, I worry that neon is the sort of cheese sandwich of contemporary art.
That's okay with me. Nothing wrong with a good cheese sandwich, especially if it's grilled. This is Tracy Emin, good piece.
People like you need to.
There's some more.
You've got a couple of medicine cabinets.
Got a couple of medicine cabinets. Our good friend Damien again. This office has a nice Koons sculpture here. It is very pretty. Here is a great Richard Prince painting.
Ah, that's one of the new ones.
That's one of the newer
ones. You
ones.
must have got that really recently.
It's a more of a recent situation. I love Richard Prince. Great painter. This is a great painting.
What do you like about this picture?
I just love the lightness of it and the coloration and the forms and the hands and the legs. Come on, look at this. Look how great this is. He loved or he hates.
Alongside supporting prices, there was a second criticism, that of market domination made against art dealers like the Mugrabis. In many commodities markets, there are laws about owning so much of something that you can influence the price. It's known as cornering the market. In the 1990s, a Japanese trader was prosecuted for owning 5% of the world's copper supply. The Mugrabis own around 9% of the world's important Warhols. A.B. Rosen owns another 1%. But there are no rules about cornering the market in the art market.
They make this comparison. There's people who make the standard comparison. They say, you can do things in the art market that there's no way you could get away with in the commodities markets or the financial markets.
Look at what's going on with the oil market. You know, that type of speculation happens left and right. The same type of speculation happens in the art market, so it happens
that happens in every market.
In every market, it swings.
You're not meant to sort of own 10% of the world's copper reserves, are you? If you're a
But there are
dealer?
people that do that.
Yeah.
There are people that have 10% of the reserves of copper, or there's people that control the luxury goods market, or there's people that control the airline industry, or there's people that control many industries.
Everybody has been saying, you know, there are 6, 7, 8 people cornering and manipulating the Warhol market. It's nice to believe that, but in reality, it's not possible. There's just too much out there.
Art collectors, I was learning, had a way of admitting and denying something at the same time. But was there anything wrong with dominating the art market? Certainly, it wasn't illegal. But only time would tell if prices had been inflated by this to unsustainable levels.
It's not defending the prices of the artist. It's because at the end of the day, you still have to pay for these things. You know, so you can only defend and do things smartly. You don't want to go and buy a painting for 3 times the price of what it really costs.
On the other hand,
the market.
But you don't want to let it go down in value either.
The auction houses were also playing their own part in the contemporary art bubble through their business practices. The art market had bubbled once before. This is Van Gogh's Irises. In 1987, this painting sold for a record price of £30 million. But the buyer could only afford to bid this high because Sotheby's lent him half the final price. As a result of the controversy that followed, the New York State Assembly held an inquiry into the art market, and I am about to meet the man who led it.
It had to do with the sale of the Van Gogh painting, The Irises, in which there was an Australian named Alan Bond who had about $25 million, a Japanese gentleman who had about $50 million, which meant that the painting should have sold for about $26 million. Sotheby's decided to lend Mr. Bond another $26 million, and the net result of that was a dramatic bubble in the cost and prices for French Impressionism. This bubble was created by a decision by Sotheby's to lend money to one of 2 bidders, and by so doing, knowing that it would raise the price, it struck me as unethical.
20 years on, Sotheby's and other auction houses still offer many kinds of credit. Sotheby's public filings show their lending doubled from 2005 to 2007. If the art world wasn't alarmed by this, the financial world was. In 2008, Sotheby's share price lost 80% of its value from its peak in October 2007. One investor had appeared on business television to talk about the Sotheby's stock he was selling.
I'm short the shares of Sotheby's and have been for a while. Bid, yeah, which is pretty much on its lows here. So despite the happy talk about the auctions last week and coming up this week, the stock market's not buying it yet.
Jim Chanos was a billionaire hedge funder famous for predicting the collapse of Enron. He was now taking out a short position on Sotheby's, which meant betting tens of millions on the fact that the art market was not doing as well as people said.
I think the auction market is actually perhaps the most misleading aspect of all of the art market. The auction market is, shall we say, subject to certain manipulation. Well, you said that, I didn't.
We began shorting Sotheby's really in late summer of '07, about a little over a year ago.
Why?
Well, I began to have, based on the fact that I'm involved in the art market, I began to have concerns that Sotheby's have become certainly more leveraged over the past handful of years. At a time, probably, as prices have gone higher, when they should have gotten less leverage.
Chanos had a second criticism. He was suspicious of the auction house's practice of offering guarantees. In order to attract major works, auction houses promised to pay the seller a guaranteed minimum price, whether the work sold or not. Sotheby's guarantees had increased sevenfold in only 2 years to almost £500 million by 2007. Chanos thought this was speculative and risky.
Once Sotheby's got in the business of guaranteeing some certain amount of dollars to me, the seller, they suddenly began making judgments about the values of art. And that took them out of the realm of strictly being an agent. In fact, they are betting that prices will be higher. And that becomes dangerous, because then you become part of the system itself.
Both Sotheby's and Christie's refused my requests for interviews to discuss this subject. Sotheby's wrote to me saying,
"The frank bias, even contempt you have expressed about contemporary art, which is an important part of our business, is impossible to ignore. While it is your absolute right to produce a programme as you wish, it is also Sotheby's absolute right not to assist you in your efforts."
The problem that the auction houses have, in Sotheby's in particular, is that they stopped being agents and became principals again. And that is the classic problem in a bubble, whether it be real estate, art, stocks, in which we see traditional middlemen, like banks and brokers, for example, who suddenly decided to become hedge funds themselves. And we saw what trouble that got them into.
By the end of July 2008, I knew that the contemporary art market was awash with credit and full of people who thought prices could go up forever. It was just like the UK's property market. Economists had a word for that kind of scenario: a bubble.
Classic phase of a bubble is that people get, in the early stages, it develops a momentum of its own. And I think what happens is people get just excited by a rise in price.
Excellent. At $77 million then.
One thing that drives a bubble is debt and leverage. The more people can borrow, the more they can defer the payment, the more they can afford to pay, and the more that drives up the price. And once the prices have been driven up, that creates a momentum and everyone wants to get on board. There is no shortage of these goods in the market, and that's another useful feature for a bubble. You couldn't have a bubble in Titian's, because Titian's only change hands once in a generation. Whereas if you have an artist like Warhol, whose legacy of tens of thousands of screen paintings, then of course they're coming to the market by the dozen.
Most contemporary art is sold by dealers through their galleries or privately, rather than in public at auctions. But I was developing a theory of how the auction rooms were the key to the contemporary art bubble, and I wanted to run it past the top expert in the field. I had one more meeting in New York with the man who wrote the art world's most carefully read tip sheet, the bare facts.
And the illusion is that the auction market is the real market. But that's an illusion, because it's easily manipulated.
You've just admitted the auction market is easily manipulated, so you use the auction market to manipulate prices, and then you use those prices set at auction to raise the prices of all the stuff you're selling privately.
Duh.
That's the game, isn't it?
Duh. You're assuming that these guys who are playing the game don't know what's going on. They know what's going on. But wouldn't you rather buy into something? You're a little bit more comfortable buying a Warhol, maybe knowing that Larry Gagosian, A.B. Rosen, and Alberto Mugambi, for the most part, often protect the prices of that. Look, who are you trying to protect here? 20 billionaires who own other Damien Hirst? Don't worry about them. They don't need protection.
The billionaires don't need protection, but ordinary people do, because we are subsidizing the art market in various ways. There is a long tradition of rich collectors donating works of art to public institutions or setting up their own private ones. This is supposed to be an act of pure philanthropy. But in many countries, collectors who donate art to museums, even to their own personal ones, receive big tax breaks. And the money they save has to be made up by other taxpayers.
In the States, you can deduct up to 30% of your gross income every year. You can shelter it from taxes by donating that an equivalent value. So let's say you earn $100 million and you donate $30 million worth of art to your private foundation in that year. You can reduce your taxable income down to $70 million. And if you're taxed at a 40% rate, you've saved a very substantial amount of money. You've saved $12 million in cash that you would otherwise have to pay to the government.
There is also a long tradition of sponsorship of art events by banks and corporations. This has always been recognized as a mixture of charity, PR, and business. It's a good way for the sponsor to enhance their brand and to meet rich clients. But an investigation by the US authorities has revealed that one Swiss bank took this a step further.
Billions and billions of dollars worth of US assets find their way into these secrecy tax havens, aided by banks, trust companies, accountants, lawyers, and others.
At events it sponsored in America, including the art fair in Miami, UBS bankers had been quietly recruiting rich clients who wished to avoid American taxes. UBS opened 20,000 bank accounts for US citizens that were hidden from the eyes of their tax authorities.
Swiss bankers regularly traveled to the United States to target US citizens for net new money, often traveling together to UBS-sponsored functions designed to attract wealthy potential clients, and carrying encrypted computers that allegedly even US customs agents could not read.
The billionaires were effectively hijacking art history with all their money, and they were making a tidy profit out of it.
Somebody has said to me recently, he said, well, at the end of the day, Ben, it's just rich people scamming each other. It's not a big deal.
Frankly, I'm not interested in the argument we can sustain a dishonest system because it's rich people who are being dishonest. That goes back to the class and cultural condescension that I noticed across this whole community when we first got involved.
Speculation, mass production, public exhibition, price protection, and a love for art all helped create the contemporary art bubble. But according to the rules of a bubble, there will always be a turning point when people stop buying and prices fall. If this happened in the art world, then auction houses like Sotheby's would be burdened with the debts from guarantees on works they couldn't sell. And dealers like the McGrabys would be saddled with large inventories of work from artists whose prices they were supporting.
I think dealers are loaded with inventory. I think dealers have taken on a lot of debt. I think collectors have taken on a lot of debt. I think there's a lot more debt in the art system than people in the art market would like you to believe.
There was one artist above all who was at the center of the contemporary art boom, Damien Hirst. He made his name in the early 90s with his famous shark bought by Charles Saatchi. By 2007, he had at least 6 studios around the world where over 150 assistants made his work in series. Animals in formaldehyde, medicine cabinets, spin and spot paintings. He was represented by the world's most powerful galleries, Larry Gagosian in New York and J. Joplin's White Cube Gallery in London.
Damien is an artist who has really been at the centre of this contemporary art boom. It's his art that has inspired a lot of people to get out and look at contemporary art in general.
It's exciting, and it throws and spins your head around, and it makes you question things, and it makes you question the way you look at things, and he makes you think about death, death, death all the time, but in a very exciting and novel and irreverent way.
By 2008, Hirst was, according to some reports, a dollar billionaire whose every show was said to be a sellout. But behind the headlines, Hirst had not been as successful an artist as he appeared. In June of 2007, he exhibited a new work of art, the most expensive in history, with a price tag of £50 million. All summer, the gallery looked for buyers.
Why didn't you spend £50 million on Damien Hirst's diamond-encrusted skull?
I tried buying the skull.
You tried buying the skull?
Absolutely. And it's something that I would have loved to have bought, or still love to have bought, because it's such an important piece in my opinion. And
were you prepared to pay the full asking price?
No.
Otherwise you would have ended up with it.
No. But I had a number in mind that I would have bought it for, and we spoke to them seriously about it, but
35
what?
Million.
What?
Pounds.
No, that's too. That we were thinking about a little less than that.
In August 2007, Hirst Gallery and his business manager Frank Dunphy told journalists that they had sold the skull for its full asking price to a consortium of investors. But a year later, Dunphy revealed that he, the White Cube's owner Jay Joplin, and Damien Hirst himself still owned a controlling interest in this work of art. All three refused to participate in my documentary.
Look, the art market is as transparent or as untransparent at certain times. And, you know, if you're an artist and you have a certain price that you're asking for a piece, and you don't have the takers, you'll create some sort of a story.
In the financial markets, it's illegal to conceal the failure of a share issue or to disguise it with sales to front companies. In the 80s, employees of the British bank NatWest had been prosecuted for that in the Blue Arrow scandal.
The first crack in the market, in my view, was the celebrated Damien Hirst diamond skull, a marquee piece marketed for an awful lot of money, £50 million, I believe, and then kind of quietly taken off the market with the view that it's sold, but it's sold to an investor group that included the artist, and you know, all these things smack to any observer of the securities market as a failed underwriting, if you will, where the inventory had to go back to the sellers in one way, shape, or form.
The fact that the skull hadn't sold in its entirety to unconnected third-party collectors suggested that Hirst dealers had pushed his prices too high. There was other evidence too. In the course of making this documentary, I obtained an extraordinary internal document from a source at White Cube. It was a list of all the works of art by Damien Hirst available for sale at that gallery. There were hundreds of them. It looked like dynamite, and I decided to leak it to the press.
This is amazing. This is pages and pages of document with prices.
Have you ever seen a document like this before?
No. I mean, I won't ask you how you got it, but I am very surprised that you have it, because this information is not information that is ever disclosed to anyone. The received wisdom is that, you know, there's a waiting list for artists such as Damien Hirst. That's the myth that we are always being told about, and clearly that is not the case. I mean, you know, adding up these prices, I think conservatively they're sitting on over £100 million worth of Hirst stock.
The art newspaper ran with the leaked inventory on the front page. It turned out to be big news. The story was picked up by newspapers all over the world, from India to Germany to America. In Britain, the Sunday Times wrote about it and asked the White Cube Gallery to comment.
I spoke to the head of press, who basically said, that's a complete lie, we sold everything. I then kind of left her to pause and take breath again. I say, well, are you actually categorically saying it's a complete lie? Because I'll quote you on that. She then said, well, no, let me get back to you. I then put in a call to Tim Marlowe, who's a head curator there. He initially also said, oh, that's bullshit or bollocks or whatever word he wanted to say, really. And then I said, look, Tim, we're running this story. You know, all I need to know is what I'm saying completely wrong. And he kind of backtracks a bit. And Tim eventually came up with quite a clever little quote saying we'd be delighted if we had that number of Hirsts unsold, i.e., in his terms, that means there's still a market out there.
Meanwhile, the general economic news became ever more apocalyptic. The British Chancellor said that we were in for the worst recession in 60 years. But by now, Damien Hirst had announced the most daring commercial move of his career, a massive auction of new work, something that no artist had ever tried before.
I think it's going to be fascinating for a lot of reasons. I think Damien is an absolutely brilliant businessman. Whether he's being too clever by half now or not, we're going to have to see. Certainly, gallerists and dealers must be fuming. It's obviously sidelining the dealers in favor of sort of an auction.
And of course, we know that Jay Joplin has actually been supporting the prices of Damien Hirst at auction, hasn't he, over the past year?
Of course he has. So's Larry. I mean, they've all been doing it, but...
The big question is whether Jay Joplin and Larry Gagosian bid on Damien Hirst's work at his auction at Sotheby's.
I don't think we're going to see much of that, but I could be wrong. I've been surprised a lot.
You know, you have nightmares that you're going to wake up in, that they're going to go, they're going to go lot 9 and still no hands are going up. Lot 10, and somehow the dealers or galleries have managed to convince everybody not to buy, but you know, that's just in a very dark, paranoid moment. I'm sure it'll be fine.
As the auction approached, I became convinced that the bubble would burst on the night of the sale, partly because of the global economic crisis, and partly because I thought Hirst dealers would not support his market. But many commentators I met at this time predicted a different outcome.
The first problem is for the dealers who hold lots of stock in Damien Hirst. Jay Joplin, Larry Gagosian, they're in catch-22. They have to ask themselves, do we support this sale? Do we allow the Hirst price to sink before our eyes, see the value of our holdings go down? Or do we join in, try and buy, at the very least support the price? I think there's only one answer to that question.
You know, they really have worked hard, Sotheby's, and they really have made sure that, that certainly by number of lots, that the thing will be, percentage of lots sold will look good. They've been able to go around to all their friends in the art world, of which there are an awful lot, and call in favours, frankly, because it's so important that it goes well. And no one who's connected with the modern and contemporary art world wants the market to turn.
On the day of the auction, there were 2 important stories in one of London's daily newspapers. On the cover was the worst financial news since the 1930s. And inside was an article by me. Sotheby's didn't know I'd leaked the Hirst inventory, but they'd banned me from attending the auction in a professional capacity, citing my bias against contemporary art. So I waited outside.
It'll be incredible.
I was only allowed to go in without my camera, and I had to stand in a room downstairs at the back. I thought the auction would fail, given the appalling financial crisis we were in, but I was wrong. Every lot sold, often for way above its estimate. The auction made £111 million.
Still with Claudia and selling for $2.3 million. With Bruno now on the telephone at $3.3 million. It's in 3 places now at $3.3 million. On the left here at $3,300,000. Thank you, Bruno. $3.3 million. Are you going on, madam? Selling to you, Shane. Fair warning, Alex. Last chance. at 9 million too. Sold, congratulations. Thank you very much indeed. 8 million 5.
I don't think I can take any more, actually. I'm trying to think what it reminds me of. You know, it's a bit like the Titanic. You know, we're sailing towards the iceberg, and all the people in there, they're still dancing to the band that plays until the end. I've been proved wrong. I thought it wasn't going to do so well.
I told you it was going to do amazing.
What's your explanation for it?
He's the best.
But the auction, it turned out, may not have succeeded in quite the way intended. As Hirst and Sotheby's had hoped, over 30% of the buyers were new collectors. No wonder, at the end of a bubble, waves of inexperienced novices always try to jump on the bandwagon. But one of the aims of the auction was to show that Hirst could bypass his gallery dealers to sell a whole new body of work. And that wasn't quite what this auction proved.
The Gagosian Gallery seemed to be bidding on about 5 or 6 works maximum. On the other hand, White Cube stated and confirmed that they bought 5 works for clients, as they said, and bid on another 20. And J. Jopling was a very keen bidder on the first lot in the sale. It was a spin and butterfly painting that was sold for a multiple of its estimate, and he was the buyer. So he got the sale off to a flying start. And the 2 most expensive formaldehyde works, there were interventions by Gagosian and White Cube when the bidding hesitated. And the Shark at around, I think it was around 3.3 million, there was hesitation, and J. Jopling entered a bid. And in the case of the Golden Calf, which was expected to make about 12 million pounds, again, there was hesitation, I forget the exact level, but bidding lulled for a moment, and the Gagosian Gallery tendered a bid, which was spotted in the room. Now, they may have been bidding for clients, but of course other people infer, well, they were just supporting the market of this important artist.
8,900,000, 9 million pounds, at 9 million pounds here. We're sharing it.
Damien Hirst has been absolutely brilliant because not only has he got 100% of the proceeds from the sale of these works, but he's managed, in certain cases, to get his dealer to actually pay him extra money to support his own market.
Lot number 345, the Diamond Dust Shoes by Andy Warhol. And we will start this at 190,000 pounds, 200,000 now, at 200,000.
The bubble did not burst on the night of the Hirst sale, but it proved to be the last hurrah. The auctions in October and November were a disaster.
Anymore at 220. All done. Last chance then at 220,000 pounds.
When the auctioneer says passed, it means the lot has not sold. The auction houses sold around half their lots and made around half of what they expected.
More than 300,000 pounds now. Down it goes at 300,000 pounds.
Many works of art by the famous names of the contemporary art boom, like Damien Hirst, Andy Warhol and Richard Prince, failed to sell.
Pounds. 3,200,000 pounds.
Was it the end of an era tonight?
No, my friend. It was the end of that sale.
You think so?
It was a horrible sale.
We know that in the past 3 or 4 years we've had lots of speculation on property, don't we? We've had lots of speculation on oil. We've had lots of speculation on other commodities. Forgive me for saying this, but I just worry that we've also had speculation on art.
Oh, absolutely. There's been a little bit of everything.
Today time, I think they did very good auction. They did very well.
But within days, the mood in the art world had changed. The Mugrabis consigned at least 30 works of art to the auctions in the autumn season. Only half found buyers. A.B. Rosen was also trying to sell work.
A.B., can I just ask you a couple?
The news coming out of the contemporary art market got worse and worse. By the end of 2008, Sotheby's declared £60 million of losses. At the contemporary auctions in February 2009, business was down 75%.
All the frenzy bidding we saw on the way up is going to be matched by frenzy, selling on the way down.
So basically, the art market exhibits the same flaws and vices as the wider economy is exhibiting.
Yeah, it's the same type of thing. It's run by people. It's not immune. Greed and fear run these things.
I returned to the contemporary art market a year after the financial collapse. I wanted to find out what had been happening, and I had some appointments with some old friends. There'd been plenty of bad news in 2009. The stock markets had been recovering since the spring, but there was no sign of recovery in prices for contemporary art. Galleries had slimmed down their staff, and the once crowded auction previews were now empty. In May, this sculpture by Jeff Koons sold at Sotheby's for only £3.5 million. It had reportedly been offered for sale for over £10 million in autumn 2008. And the eventual buyer was Koons' own dealer, Larry Gagosian. Nevertheless, contemporary art was still being bought, and many people from the art world thought they'd had a lucky escape.
Do you think it's been a crash?
Oh, correction, maybe a better term. Serious correction, but...
50% correction.
Well, again, it's artist by artist.
But a lot of the top names, like Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons, they've seen their prices plummet the furthest, haven't they?
Well, if you were Richard Prince selling paintings at $7 million, 80% correction down to $1 million, you can survive on that. What other industry has had maybe a 70% decline of revenue and is still surviving? It's pretty remarkable.
But in order to survive, galleries and auction houses had changed the way they did business. London's biggest art fair, Frieze, still looked busy. There were over 150 galleries attending. I wanted to ask them how well they were doing, but I wasn't personally allowed to film inside. Still, one of my old contacts from the financial world had first-hand experience about the problems art dealers were now facing and their solutions.
I think the dealer market is still in disarray. I think there's still a lot of inventory of questionable art. I think not a lot of it has moved. And I think transactions are getting more creative. I think that people are stretching out payments. Dealers are throwing in a free art piece, sort of buy two, get one free. And I've had offers like that.
In October, I learned that the Damien Hirst auction had itself become an example of these new creative deals. All year long, art market journalists like myself struggled to find out how Sotheby's had made such a success of the sale.
Are you going on, madam? Selling to you, share. Fair warning, Alex. Last chance at 9 million too. Sold. Congratulations.
I discovered that some buyers had been given unusually generous payment terms and had yet to complete their purchases.
Did you buy work in the evening sale or the day sale?
Both.
Really? So big pieces?
Big pieces.
For several $1 million?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. We got a special option to extend the payment plan.
And did you have to renegotiate terms with Sotheby's after the auction?
Just, no, later. We renegotiate much later and agreed with schedules.
For a year or something?
Yeah, approximately.
The normal payment term for auction buyers is between 1 and 3 months. Yet at least one of them was given a special deal after the Hirst sale.
But today is October the 6th. Presumably, if Sotheby's gave you a year to pay, you would have...
No, we have a good schedule with them, good terms.
So longer than a year, even?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Are you paying interest?
No.
Wow.
Do you mind?
In the months after the auction, Damien Hirst had closed down his studios making butterfly and spin paintings and sacked scores of his assistants. Now, he had just opened his first exhibition of paintings, which he had actually made in his own hand. It was a sign that the contemporary art market had changed fundamentally. Even those who thought the art market had been saved knew things would never be the same again.
The most important art movement of the last 10 years, unfortunately, wasn't art, it was the art market. It wasn't the equivalent of pop art or minimal art or conceptual art. That the ism that happened the first 10 years of the 21st century, unfortunately, was the art market. So now what's due, it's time for the artists to step up. And if something leads the art world and the art market out in the next 10 years, it better be the art.
Yeah. Maybe they'll stop sort of gluing 20 butterflies on a piece of canvas painted the same colour 1,000 times.
Yeah, the idea that it was too easy. They had no risk involved. If I want to make an 80-foot golden penis that's got a video installation that can only be shown outdoors, an edition of 9, you know, no one's going to put up with that anymore.
The art world is divided about what the future holds. Some say that prices will eventually recover. Others that they will never again reach the levels of May 2008, when I began my film. Some good things have come out of this craze. Art is now part of our lives more than it ever was before. Some of us even drive it round London. But the excesses of the last 5 years mean that the great contemporary art bubble will surely go down in history as the epitome of the vanity and the folly of our age.
The art newspaper story was a spectacular scoop. It's the number of unsold paintings that have created nervousness among collectors.
What have you heard?
Dealers saying that this is a disaster. When you go to a top gallery, there is a very cool and intimidating atmosphere, and you regard as an enormous privilege when you're finally allowed to buy one of these objects. But what the art newspaper story did was just rip away that facade and showed that even a powerful dealer like White Cube actually hasn't got that many customers. The art newspaper story was the great Wizard of Oz moment, when the curtain was pulled aside and there was a little man playing the organ.